Welcome to another OU Insider Under the Visor Sooners Postgame podcast powered by Olipop. If you're not drinking Olipop, you need to do so. You can go find it at one of your 4 convenience stores and locations of Walmart, Whole Foods, Target, and Sprouts. Parker now is drinking his Olipop. Which flavor is it today?
Cream soda tonight, boys. That's what we're rolling with. It's past midnight.
It is past midnight. Oklahoma won 28-11. The last time Oklahoma played SMU was 1985, if I remember correctly. And I do not remember the game or the score of the game, but I do know that Oklahoma, the game was eerily similar, if I remember correctly. I was 2.5 at the time, but the game was eerily similar. I've watched some stuff about it. This was back when SMU was a lot like they were today. They were coming on the probation, all that type of stuff, but they still had a ton of talent from the previous years where they were literally the best team in college football. Or one of the top 2 or 3 teams in college football at that time, the Pony Express. But Oklahoma struggled a little bit offensively, and we're going to get to all that. But first things first, and we have to address this. And let me tell you, we've talked about this for like 20 minutes before the podcast so we could figure out how we wanted to attack this situation because it's delicate as it may be. During the post game, our man Parker Thune was pointed out that former Baylor head coach Art Briles, and we all know what he's allegedly been accused of during all those, because he was never found convicted of anything. He was never arrested, so we have to say alleged. That's the proper thing to do at this point. Even with the Hamilton report, I think it was the Hamilton report, right? That's what it was called, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Even with all of that, the stain that was on Baylor was rough, right? We all understand that too. Having said that, Parker, that photo, walk us through how that came about, because your photo just absolutely blew up, and it
did. It did.
Crap storm within the confines of the Switzer Center to where Joe C's talked about it, and it's caused a crap storm with the fan base. So
yeah. Well,
walk us through that, and we're going to have Jesse talk about it as well.
Naturally, you have any prominent figure from outside the program show up on the sidelines at a game, people are going to take notice, right? And I did, several other reporters did. We all posted photos to Twitter of Art Briles standing next to Jeff Levy, and it just so happened that mine was the one that kind of took off. Maybe it's, I don't know. I have a telephoto lens. It's a real nice lens. Maybe it was just the quality of the picture. I don't know why that particular tweet blew up as opposed to the other ones, but I will be 100% honest here. Background here, context. I was 16 years old when the Baylor scandal went down. So that obviously preceded my career in the media, preceded a time where I was really heavily scrutinizing such matters as this across the world of college football. And so I will admit that my impression of everything that had gone on circa 2015 regarding Baylor football, I thought it was more of a Baylor thing than an Art Briles thing. And the reason why there was some public, well, for lack of a better word, hatred toward Art Briles was because he was naturally a prominent figure, being the head football coach at the time. I did not realize, I will admit this, I did not realize the full extent of the manner in which Art Briles is held culpable for all of what went down at Baylor. And so I think the context that people need to understand as to how and why this happened is Art Briles is, of course, Jeff Lebby's father-in-law. And after football games in Norman at Owen Field, the coaches' families all stream onto the field to greet the coaches. And in this particular case, Art Briles happened to be in attendance, and he was one of the ones that meandered onto the field after the game to chat with Jeff Lebby. And yeah, that that brought us to what has been a very eventful night across the Oklahoma beat and across the social media world as a whole, because this is bigger than just the OU beat right now. Obviously, this has been picked up by regional and national outlets, and it's something that people are talking about. We had a comment from Brent Venables. We had a comment from Jeff Lebby. We had a statement from Joe Castiglione late Saturday night. And so, yeah, I will be forthcoming in acknowledging that I did not imagine this was going to be as big of a deal as it was. But, now that I've been, now that a few of our peers on the beat and others who are a little bit more experienced, a little less green than I am, have kind of enlightened me as to the nature and the severity of everything that happened at Baylor back in the day. I do understand now why it's become as talked about as it has over the last few hours. So yeah, I fired off that photo, and it's become the biggest thing on OU Twitter and arguably the biggest thing on college football Twitter tonight. That's where we stand on that.
Jesse, you want to expound on your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, sure. I think it was. I mean, it was just the timing of it was interesting. I know he was down on the field after the game, wearing OU gear next to Art Briles, and it was a game that was. I think in a lot of ways it depends on the way you look at the way OU played, but this immediately became the story, and there's a few different reasons why. I mean, the details, the shape of that investigation at Baylor. I mean, it's horrific. I mean, it is. It's disgusting. It's horrific. It's awful to the victims that were involved, and Art Briles was the head of it, and also accused of knowingly knowing what was going on in that scandal and not doing enough to or not doing nearly enough to make it right. And so the hard part is, yeah, that connection with Jeff Lebby, which is really hard to ignore. It's when Jeff Lebby got hired, the fact that he was on staff and his connection to Art Briles was a discussion when he was hired at OU. That's the reality of it. And also it just, I mean, regardless of all that other stuff, which again, Art Briles involved. I mean, there's a reason why he's no longer in the, no longer in a coaching position, but to be wearing OU gear, to the fact that he was involved in a scandal at, not only as a college coach, so it's college football, but at Baylor, the same conference as OU, and to be on the field in OU gear, it would be. I'm not saying it would be right. I'm not saying it would be better if he was on the field and not wearing OU gear, but the fact he was wearing OU gear, and then you look at Joe Castiglione's statement, which I think is pretty telling in terms of what this dynamic is, and I'll read it because I had it sent to me by the athletic department. I was just as disappointed as many of our fans when I learned of the post-game situation tonight. It shouldn't have happened, and it was my expectation it never would, based on boundaries we previously set. I've addressed it with the appropriate staff. So again, we don't know all of the details. We don't know exactly what that means, but what that implies is that Joe Castiglione had a conversation with Jeff Lebby or the staff that Art Briles was not to be on the field. That is what that statement implies. And even Brent Venables' comments after the game about how he didn't know Art Briles was on the field until right before his post-game press conference. We don't know all the details, but the reality is Art Briles was the figurehead in a horrible, massive, disgusting scandal. And the OU athletic director has made it clear that it was his understanding that he shouldn't be on the field. And for Art Briles to be on the field today in OU gear is a horrible look. It looks insensitive. It's bad optics. And yes, and I know Brandon, we all talked about this. The hard thing is that Art Briles is, or not hard. Of course, Jeff Levy is his son-in-law. He wants to be there to support his kid. You can look at it from that perspective, but the reality is he was the figurehead of a horrible scandal where people got hurt while he was a head football coach in the same conference as OU, and he was on the field wearing OU gear. At best, it's a horrible look. At worst, it is insensitive. It's just not a good look. It's just a really, really bad look. And I think most fans are outraged, and I think for good reason.
Yeah. And I want people to, and you made a lot of good points, Jesse and Parker. I want people to understand this too. And this isn't anybody. I'm not, how do I want to word this? I'm not pointing a finger and saying that I'm trying to word this right, because you have to word this stuff just right when you say this stuff right now.
It's a very delicate subject.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So here's the thing. And Parker, you talked to somebody that we're both friends with on the phone after all that went down. And they said this, and I kind of agree with this. And that doesn't mean that I'm like looking past what all that happened to Baylor, because it's just disgusting, right? Like, oh, that's gross and disgusting and insensitive for the situation as it is, right? Like, we all understand that, but there's also the part where he's just a dude trying to live his life and be around his family. And unfortunately for him, that being who he is and being where he was, it didn't mix right. It didn't mix right. Like, honestly, and we talked about this as well. If he would have just been at the game and just waited, like, I don't even want to say the locker room, or waited outside the stadium, or waited for them to come out or whatever, and not been wearing OU gear, nobody would have said a word about it, because they would have been like, oh, he's there. He's just, whatever. No, I can't say nobody, because I think there's a lot of people that would say something about it if they knew. But the fact that he was there right after the win, plain as day for everybody to see, and the fact that Joe C thought that this wasn't going to happen makes it's hard for me to wrap my head around, like, what's next. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know what's next in this situation. And nobody, I can tell you, all three of us aren't going to sit here and condone anything. I can tell you that much. Like, we're literally the type that is just like, no, I do think at some point, Levy's probably going to address it on Monday.
Well, he's no doubt going to be asked about it on Monday.
Yeah, he's going to be asked about it. And I don't envy him in this situation, because I don't think either one of them thought much of it when they were doing it. It was like, oh, just family, just down there doing their thing, right? Like, they in their mind, they weren't thinking this is going to blow up to be a big deal because we're family. That is probably what they were doing. They didn't think about it at all. And unfortunately for them, because of everything that happened at Baylor, a decade isn't long enough. Right? I mean, what has it been? 8, 9, 10 years since all that went down? 8 years. Yeah. It's not long enough yet for people to forgive and forget. I don't know that anybody's ever going to forgive. And again, we have to say allegedly, because we don't know the whole truth to all of everything. And I think that's something we have to continue to understand. Like, I guarantee you, Briles has his side, right? Have we ever even heard that side? Has
Mm.
anybody ever, have we ever heard that side of his story?
He certainly contested everything
Mm-hmm.
as it was happening. We don't really know. And there were the report that came out, the things that happened a couple of
Hamilton, yeah.
years after are difficult.
They're
And
disgusting.
yeah, no, they are. No, I just
It's
mean
disgusting.
from the
Yeah.
way everything that was handled, because there were things that were contested. I think Briles filed a counter lawsuit against Baylor. I think. Um, the only thing I'll say is I think the reality is the last thing I'll say is Brandon. I think to your point, I think the hard part is, yeah, like aside from all of that stuff about what happened at Baylor, the reality is he wanted, Jeff
He wants to
Levy
support
is
his
his.
family. Yeah, that's. I
Yeah,
mean,
he
he
does.
does. And
And if it,
we're not. Just sorry, I don't. I'm not people. I'm not trying to cut Jesse off. I just want to make sure that I get my point across that I made earlier. We're not like condoning any side or anything like that. We're going to tell you the facts of what we know and how we know it.
Yeah. Well,
And in
I
our opinion is he was there with his family, and that I Jesse, I think it's what you were about to say, right? It's like he was. That's the unfortunate part about it is like the family aspect of it, right? And it's that is the innocence of it that is compiled with all the other stuff that is we think is gross and detestable, right?
well, and what happened at Baylor is objectively grotesque, right? Like
Yeah.
I want to make absolutely sure. I want to triple down and make sure everybody realizes, like, we are all very aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though I was 16 at the time, yes, I understood how grotesque things were at Baylor. What I didn't understand, as I mentioned, was the extent to which Art Briles was and is held culpable. And the thing about a situation like that is it's something that follows you. And it hasn't only followed Art Briles, but it's followed Jeff Lebby too. And it will follow anybody who was associated and or affiliated with what happened at Baylor circa
Mm-hmm.
2015. That's the reason why Joe Castiglione had to answer questions back in December of 2021 when Jeff Lebby was hired. Now, um, again, I I feel as though this isn't going to be the last word on this whole ordeal. Like you said, undoubtedly, Levy's going to be asked about this again on Monday.
And so is Venables on Tuesday.
Yeah, and unless there is a directive from the OU communications office that certain questions are off limits, which I can't imagine for a situation like this there would be. Like, this is something that's going to it's going to have to be addressed again. And so I it's obviously very raw and very fresh right now. It's what, 4, maybe 5 hours old as we sit here recording this podcast. And so um I'll I'll be curious to see what additional details we get between now and, Monday, Tuesday, when inevitably this will get dredged back into the news cycle.
well, the last thing I'll say to that point, Parker, and you brought up some good points to continue what I was saying. The last thing I'll say is the reality is, because of the scope of that scandal, because of how awful it was, and because R. Briles was culpable for it. The reality is there is that balance between, it's not about, I mean, if he had just been in a suite or something, nobody probably would have thought anything of it. The reality is he's on the field in OU gear, and considering not only the scope of that scandal, but where it happened, what his role was when it happened, and the fact that he was wearing OU gear while he was on the field, it's an incredibly horrible look. It looks insensitive, and I think there's a reason why there are. You can't separate. The reality is he can't live a completely normal life because of the
No doubt.
scandal he was in.
Yeah.
He can't live it. He can't just do what he wants. Also, not only because of the optics, but because of everything that happened in the scandal. And OU needs to distance itself, and it's awkward because Jeff Lebby is the offensive coordinator. It's an awkward thing, but OU and that's why I think Joe Castiglione alluded to that in his statement. They need to separate as much as they can, given how weird it is that Jeff Lebby is the offensive coordinator. They need to separate themselves from it because that scandal is so awful, and Art Briles was such a big part of it. That's the last thing I'll say.
No, everybody made good points. It's a tough situation. I, I I feel for the OU staffers, if we're going to be honest, that are going to have to, and Brent Venables, that are going to have to deal with this, and then the players that are going to have to deal with the fallout of everybody's reaction to this, because it has a chance to compile up and be a distraction. Thank goodness for Oklahoma, this didn't happen before the Cincinnati week. Like if we're looking at it from a game perspective, right? Like if this would have happened Cincinnati or Iowa State or Texas week, could you imagine just the distractions that this is going to cause for the players and the other staffers? And I want people also to understand, like, I think we all like Jeff Lebby. Like, he's a nice guy, right? Like he's a genuinely nice guy to everybody. So it's a tough situation. It's a tough situation, particularly for Joe Castiglione, particularly for Jeff Lebby, particularly for Brent Venables. Awfully awkward situation for those three, considering the backlash that happened with all of it.
It is, but I think the reality is, given Jeff Lebby's relationship with Art Briles, considering he was on staff at Baylor when it happened, it's almost in some ways shocking that it's taken this long for something like this to happen. It kind of is. And the reality is that it was a horrible scandal at Baylor. He's culpable for it. You can't really overlook that. I mean, you just can't. And it's yeah, it is a tough situation, but I think something like this was bound to happen, and I think in some ways this is the repercussions of all of that.
So what do you think what are the repercussions of all this? Like outside of the backlash and Joe Castiglione's public statement, what are the repercussions of
I think
this?
if it wasn't already clear that you got to walk on eggshells with that situation, and that the nature of Lebby's relationship with Briles, that's all the more clear now, right? And so, like, if there wasn't already a directive, and Joe Castiglione's statement was somewhat revealing, but I don't think it painted the whole picture, because I can almost guarantee you what happened is there was some gray area there, right? There was some gray area where Briles being present for the game fell somewhere in the middle between what Lebby and his family no doubt thought was permissible and what the OU administration had felt they had communicated regarding Briles' separation from anything that was going on at OU. So, I mean, maybe it's as simple as the OU administration issued a directive that Art Briles wasn't going to be on the sidelines at a football game. He wasn't going to have a field pass or anything like that. And, by the letter of the law, that it theoretically would have been abided by, given what happened on Saturday, because he just came down with the rest of Lebby's family. And so he didn't need a field pass. He wasn't on the sidelines during the game. And so I wonder if it's just some kind of miscommunication, getting your wires crossed, something along those lines. But I think it underscores the fact that when you're dealing with something this serious, that has this type of lingering gravity, you got to make absolutely certain that the communication is completely unambiguous in that regard, because if it's not, then you end up with something like we had tonight.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that again, and I think Parker's right. Joe Castiglione's statement was revealing, but it wasn't super specific in terms of what the discussions were. Does that mean that there were discussions specifically with Levy before he was hired by OU? And even if he did, what did those discussions look like? What were the parameters? But
Was
the
in the
reality,
contract.
yeah. But the reality is hiring Jeff Lebby it wasn't this controversial, but it was controversial when OU hired Lebby,
It
and I
came
think
with scrutiny.
and I think it's understandable. It is. That scandal is awful, and Lebby was on staff when it happened. It's understandable that scrutiny was there, and yeah, it's hard because Art Briles is his relationship with Lebby, but I think it's very clear, and again, it's awkward because of Lebby being on staff, but I would expect that given the severity of this and the severity of that Baylor situation, that whatever discussions they had, it's going to be explicit with the public that Art Briles is to be nowhere near the OU program in any way, shape, or form. And again, I think that's now whether that means punishments for Jeff Lebby. It's hard to say because we don't know what those discussions were. I think we will get clarity on that in a couple of days. But the reality is Josie didn't want this to happen for good reason. Art Briles is one of the most poisonous names in college football history, and he was on the field wearing OU gear. And it's reasonable that he's one of the most poisonous names in college football. It's so I don't know. I think we're going to find out a lot more in the next couple of days.
I mean, yeah, I don't think there's much more to add to this. It's an awkward situation to talk about in general. I don't even know where to go from there.
Well, let's try
Let's
to
talk about the game.
There was a game.
Talk about the game.
There
was a game that
match.
took place today that actually preceded all the drama. Oklahoma won 28-11, guys. They won.
It was a stunningly nondescript game.
It was so boring.
Save for the post-game drama, I don't know that we would have had more than 20, 30 minutes of content to discuss on this podcast.
Yeah, so thanks, Parker.
Gosh. Everything that happened on the gridiron between Oklahoma and SMU was just so, well, for lack of a better word, lackluster. There were no compelling storylines coming out of this football game. I think what you saw was a rather mundane day offensively for Oklahoma. They put up 28 points. More often than not, that's going to be good enough to win. But in the eyes of many, including the fans, that performance offensively left much to be desired. Defensively, I will say this. The Sooners played one of the better games overall that we've seen them play in recent years. And again, like SMU, the fact that it came against SMU is probably going to diminish the significance of that in the eyes of many folks. But again, like that's a program that at the very least has skill position talent offensively. And so for Oklahoma to hold their own for 60 minutes and only surrender 11 points in that football game, the lone touchdown drive coming with the aid of a couple of questionable penalties, to say the least. Man, that Oklahoma defense showed me something. Now, it's again like it's a nice momentary impression to have of the Oklahoma defense. Now the question becomes, does it hold up? And the date that everybody is going to be looking forward to now is going to be October 7th because Texas just went to Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama. So, if that wasn't already the date that Sooner fans had circled now as the real proving ground for Venables' defense in year 2, it sure is now.
Okay, so I have to give it up to the defense. Like, you have to. And I know people are going to sit there and say, well, you can poke some holes into what the defense accomplished as well. And that's true. You can. What did I think they gave up a grand total of, what was it, 300? I think both teams. I think OU had 357 and SMU had 355. Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, something along those lines. You know what it
Oh,
reminded
yeah.
me of from a defensive perspective? It
What's that?
reminded me of the second half of the Oklahoma State game last year. Because obviously the first half, the Sooners forced 4 turnovers. I think it was 4 turnovers. I think they picked off Spencer Sanders 4 times in the first half, if memory serves me correctly. Maybe it was 3 times. Anyway, but the second half of that Oklahoma State game, what I recall, and it was a bitterly cold day at Owen Field, but what I recall was that the Oklahoma defense would continually bend but not break. And that is exactly what they did tonight against SMU.
Yeah.
SMU was able to make some headway offensively. They were able to hit on some big plays. Preston Stone made a couple of real nice big boy throws.
He's
But
so
time and
good.
again, when SMU got some momentum offensively, the Sooners would do what was necessary to curtail and put a stop to that momentum. And I don't think they had a sack all night.
Are you talking about
One thing,
Oklahoma?
yeah, but one
No,
thing.
Stutzman had a sack.
Okay, there you go. Stutzman did. That's
First
right.
drive of the
Stutzman
third
did have the
quarter.
one.
Yep. First drive of the third.
So one sack, and maybe you look at one sack and go, well, okay, Oklahoma's not getting after the quarterback. They're clearly not drastically improved as far as the pass rush is concerned. But no, they had Preston Stone under duress all night. I can't count the times that they simply forced him out of the pocket towards the sideline. He ran out of real estate and had to throw the ball away. That is, while not quite as good as a sack, as close to a sack as you're going to get without actually sacking the quarterback, right? So all told, I was impressed with Oklahoma's ability to pressure the passer tonight. And it wasn't just one guy either. It
Nope.
wasn't just one guy wreaking havoc. It was a team effort. You saw a lot of rotation amongst the front four. We saw some of the young guys get involved. We saw some of the mainstays make the plays that we're used to seeing them make. And yeah, all in all, it started up front for the Sooners defensively, and that front four set the tone. Well, the front seven, I'll expand it. The front seven set the tone for what became a very impressive defensive performance overall for the Sooners over 60 minutes of football.
I agree on the D line part. The defensive line as a whole was dominant. I think, trying to look at their rushing yards, they had SMU at 117 net rushing yards on 34 attempts. They averaged 3.4 yards a rush. And I think if you're Oklahoma, and let's make that clear, like that was a lot of, I think there was that one big run where the Key Lawrence popped the ball out, but obviously they get the yardage for that because of where the ball landed and all that type of stuff. But that rushing play was one, I think that was like 30 or 40, 45 yards, something like that. Run. It was a long run. That run is what cushioned their yards per average, because had that run not taken place, they're averaging under 3 yards a rush. And if you can do that on a consistent basis, if you're the Oklahoma defense, they can be the best passing offense in the country. If you cannot run the ball, you are probably not going to beat teams like Oklahoma. I think it's pretty evident. Oklahoma played. I'm trying to think of some of the bowl games against Alabama. Rush game non-existent with any of them in 2018. Sermon, nothing. Like, none of those guys could get any momentum going, right? What happened? Oklahoma struggled offensively until later in the game because Kyler Murray had to use his legs, right? And I guess my point is that if you can curtail a rushing attack from the opposing offense, generally speaking, you're going to win that ball game, because particularly if they're rushing more than 25, 30 times. That means they're leaning on the run game quite a bit, right? And if that's not getting them anywhere, you're not going to win the ball game. I was sitting next to Billy Embody, who covers SMU for 24/7, and we both were talking. We're like, it feels like SMU should have more points than they do, because they would drive down and Oklahoma would just put the clamps down. And as good offensively as SMU is, and I think that's something we need to touch on after this, Jesse, after you talk about the D-line and your opinion on all that. We need to talk about how good is this SMU team? Do we expect them to be a 9-10 win team?
Yeah, well, for one, I'm going to pat myself on the back because
Do it. Give yourself all the love.
Flower yourself.
Well, okay, so I can't be 100% because I predicted that OU would win by 17, but I said 48-30. I said 48-31, not 28-11. Those are two different scores. However, I did expect SMU to be competitive. I honestly was impressed by them last year. I was impressed by them in week 1. So yeah, you were talking about the front 7, or the defensive line. I was pretty impressed. I thought for the most part that most of SMU's success came through the air, but on the ground, outside of a couple of big chunk runs, OU shut down SMU's rushing attack. They didn't allow Preston Stone to get outside the pocket. And I think there's a reason. In Parker, you mentioned it as like a bend but don't break. I think that's the reality. Is it doesn't matter how many yards an opposing offense gets if they don't score a bunch of points. It doesn't matter. And the reality is SMU had several drives where they had some success, that they got, past midfield, they got into OU territory, and they still didn't score. I mean, 11 points is 11 points. And I mean, SMU had 60 rushing yards at the end of the first half. I think if you're trying to find anything to complain about OU's defense, you could say that secondary is still a little, or not a little, is certainly still a work in progress. Brent Venables alluded to it after the game that Gentry Williams cornerback spot outside of, or opposite Woody Washington, like Gentry's good. They have talent in that room, but there's not a whole lot of experience. I think you saw some inexperience tonight, but regardless, the fact that SMU was one of the most explosive offenses in all of college football last year, and that they did have some success today, but still only ended with 11 points. Considering how bad OU's defense was last year, I don't know how you can complain. And given the questions about the defensive line against Arkansas State, it's still a work in progress, but that defensive line, I thought all things considered, was pretty good today.
No, it really was. SMU, I think they're going to be a 9-10 wins team in their conference this
Preston
year.
Stone's a good quarterback.
He is.
He is.
Good, maybe an understatement. He's pretty unreal, to be honest with you.
He made some plays today.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I should say he made some plays, because the plays weren't always there to be made on the other end, but he showed some flashes today that he could end up being an upper echelon college football quarterback by the time his career is finished at SMU. Also, 2 turnovers for Oklahoma today.
Yeah.
Hats off to Key Lawrence for coming up with that big forced fumble. Just punched it right out of Jalen Knighton's hands.
That was so weird, bro.
That was a weird play. It was.
It was. He just like slapped it down. Like he walked, didn't even try to tackle him, just went and just slapped it down.
He does that from time to time.
That's like, what is that, like the third time he's done that since he's been at Oklahoma?
Yeah, I was about to say, we've seen that from Key Lawrence before. It's been pretty effective.
Kansas and someplace else. I can't remember.
And then, of course, Justin Harrington coming up with a pick. Justin Harrington had himself a ball game today. Justin Harrington, like, if you want to talk about individual standouts on defense, I think you got to start with those linebackers. And with Justin Harrington at cheat out, I'm going to go ahead and loop him in with the linebackers. If we learned anything about Oklahoma defensively today, it's that they got some studs at linebacker. We knew Danny Stutzman was a stud. Kip Lewis, I think, showed that he is on the verge of taking that next step. The same can be said for Kobe McKenzie. Justin Harrington validated a lot of the offseason hype. And then the other big takeaway, man, is that we talked all offseason, Brandon, about there coming a time where Peyton Bowen was simply going to be too good to keep off the field. And it's week 2, and that time might already have come.
Oh, it's here. It's here. It's here. Through 2 weeks, Peyton Bowen has proven too good to keep off the field. Sorry, Brandon, go ahead. But that's
no.
You want to know the main takeaway? You want to know the main takeaway from 2 weeks or from 2 weeks of football? Peyton Bowen needs to be on the field a lot. And
I agree.
That block punt, considering, 28-11 looks better, but the reality is SMU cut that ball game to 14-11 early in the fourth quarter. And if it hadn't been for that Key Lawrence strip in the third quarter, I think SMU scores on that drive. There's a lot of ways this could have ended up. Now, I think OU won because they deserve to win, but there are ways that this game could have ended up where SMU wins this ball game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's controversial. And that blocked punt, considering it not only was a blocked punt, but OU scored 3 plays later, and outside of that, didn't have a ton of experience or a ton of success until the fourth quarter. That was huge. And then that pass breakup in the middle of the fourth quarter, those are 2 humongous plays from a true freshman against an SMU team that genuinely threatened Oklahoma. This wasn't like cute, they hung around for. No. SMU legitimately challenged Oklahoma today, and without those 2 plays from Peyton Bowen, I think this game could have turned out differently, or at least it wouldn't have been a 17-point win.
I will go ahead and say it, and I don't know if it's an observation that will hold up over the course of the regular season. It's been 2 games, but through 2 weeks, Peyton Bowen has been the best secondary player on Oklahoma's roster. He is playing like anything but a true freshman.
Yeah. So I talked to somebody right after the game, or as we were leaving or we were walking out of the red room, or I was actually in the red room. Parker, I was talking to you when I got the phone call, and I walked out, and when I started making my way to the press box, and I'm talking to this person is around the defensive side of the ball for Oklahoma a little bit, inside the Switzer Center, if you will. And I asked him about Peyton Bowen, and I quote, "That dude is unreal, but he still made a lot of mistakes tonight. But with him, you take the good with some of the bad, because the good is always so great. But thankfully, we have enough to show him on film that needs corrected so that he can grow and continue to be what we think he can be." End quote. That's the exact quote. And I asked this person again, I said, "How do you keep him off the field?" And they said, at the end of the day, he plays so many positions, and we did that this fall on purpose, so he could be on the field in multiple occasions and in multiple situations. So I think you're going to start seeing him play just like you did tonight, various places at Cheetah for the Cheetah position. They had 2 cheetahs out there sometimes, the nickel cheetah, whatever you want to call it, for Oklahoma. They brought 2 of them in, kind of a dime package look, and they would bring Peyton in there. And I think there was a time where they had Peyton, Woody Washington, Billy Bowman, Justin Harrington, and Key Lawrence in all at the same time. That's an impressive gaggle of defensive backs, talent-wise. Oklahoma hasn't had talent like that. And I think they're going to do that. They're going to play him some at free, some at strong, some at cheetah, and sometimes he even came in for Jaron Kanik tonight. I don't know if anybody else noticed that. I sit by Jesse, and I'm sure, Jesse, you get kind of annoyed that I sit there and all right, this person's in, or this person's in, or this person. He hears me all the time. I'm like, oh, this person's in. This person, because I want to see the personnel. And yeah, they did a lot of that. He came in for Jaron Kanek on a few occasions and played right next to, because I turned to Billy Embody and Jesse, and I was like, he's playing right next to the line. Like he was lined up like a linebacker.
Yeah.
So they're gonna use him as much as they possibly can.
And so and this is no knock on Jaron Kanek at all, but I think it's worth bringing up with Peyton Bowen and Justin Harrington and Kip Lewis and Kobe McKenzie playing as well as they are. Man, Jaron Kanek's margin for error is not very large right now if he wants to hold on to a lion's share of the snaps, because all of those defensive standouts we just talked about, all of their share of the snaps could feasibly come at the expense of Jaron Kanek. So, again, far worse problems to have right now defensively for Oklahoma. Far worse problems to have.
They're certainly not coming at the expense of Danny Stutzman.
No.
They're not. And I thought Jaron Kanek had some good plays today, but Danny Stutzman, I mean, as good as Peyton Bowen was, and I think it's good to highlight Kip Lewis and Kobe McKenzie. I think it's good to highlight that the defensive line. Danny Stutzman was everywhere. He was everywhere today. 17 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, a sack, a quarterback hurry, a fumble recovery. Danny Stutzman was everywhere. He was making plays all over the field. That's what you want to see. Yeah, OU may face better competition, better offensive competition later in the year, but what you want to see, because Danny Stutzman was touted as the undisputed leader of this defense all off season and spring and fall camp, you wanted to see a performance like that. And I honestly think the reality is, I mean, Danny Stutzman was first in tackles at 17. Kip Lewis was second with 9, and that showed on the field. Danny Stutzman was everywhere. Danny Stutzman's the leader of this defense on and off the field, and I think you're finally seeing, even though he was good last year, obviously he led the Big 12 in tackles, I think through 2 weeks you're seeing a real leader in Danny Stutzman, who is the genuine heart of this defense, which is what Brent Venables has been looking for since he got to Norman.
He's on pace for 120 tackles, by the way, this season. Not a bad start. And by the way, is anybody Ted Lasso fans?
I haven't watched it.
Okay, every time you said Danny Stutzman was everywhere, all I could sit there and go, Danny Stutzman, he's here, he's there, he's everywhere. That's all I could hear. Roy Kent is what it is fair. Ted Lasso. All right. Anyways, go ahead, Parker. I'm sorry. That's all I could hear in my head every time he said that.
Let's flip the script here.
Okay.
And talk about the offense. It was not a great day for the Sooners offensively. Not a great day. They did not get Gavin Freeman involved at all. They did not get Austin Stogner involved at all.
That's 2 games in a row, man, for Stog.
They did not get Gavin Sawchuk involved at all. And so, look, I am very much of the opinion that coaches make informed decisions on scheming and playing time based on far more context than is available to the outside world. But I'm also of the opinion that the coaches are not necessarily infallible when it comes to those decisions. And I guess before we get to the bad, let's acknowledge a few of the bright spots. Tawi Walker was fantastic tonight. Absolutely fantastic.
Stud.
And if I had told you if I had told you 3 weeks ago that a running back on OU's roster would go for 142 total yards on 20 touches, I think, something like that, 18, 20 touches against SMU. And I'd ask you to take
Barnes.
Yeah. Well, Tawi Walker probably would have been the 6th or 7th name you rattled off. But here he is, a week after earning his first start in an Oklahoma uniform. This kid's still not on scholarship. He's a walk-on. He's a walk-on all the way, making a big impact for Oklahoma out of the backfield when we all expected it to be the Sawchuk and Barnes show, the law firm of Sawchuk and Barnes. And in fairness, that's still what we expect it to be. long term as we move forward in the 2023 season. There will come a point at which those two guys are what you're rolling with. But Tawee Walker, man, the way he keeps making the most of the opportunities that he's given suggests that you're not going to be able to phase him out of the game plan at this point. That dude runs with desire. He's astronomically difficult to bring down, and he can contribute as a pass catcher as well. So very, very impressed with what I saw from him tonight. Took forever to get Jalil Farouk involved offensively, but Oklahoma made that happen, and he had a fantastic catch and run for a touchdown in the fourth quarter. And then a cursory tip of the cap to Marcus Major as well, who played second fiddle to Tawee Walker for most of the night, but when it counted and the Sooners needed the knockout blow, he was the one that delivered it with that touchdown reception midway through the fourth quarter.
Yeah, on the Gavin Sawchuk note, because people are going to want to know, I do have a note on that, and they let him in there for 2 snaps. They let him do a run because they told him he could play and suit up this week, but I was told that they want him to take a few more hits before they get him going full throttle. They said this week is big for him because this was the first week. He practiced last week, but they were very delicate with him practicing. Like, he could have gone full go, but they're trying to phase him back in. And so I would expect a much more of a dose of Gavin Sawchuk for Tulsa and beyond, as long as his hamstring holds up this week when they give him a few more shots, if that makes any sense, and takes on a few more hits during the week in practice. They want him to get a little bit more physical to test the hamstring and his ability to drive through and break tackles and all that type of stuff. So it's coming, folks. It's coming. They're doing the same thing with Javonte Barnes, I'm told. They're just being very, very delicate with both those guys. But they feel like they can because of Tawee Walker and Marcus Major. And I don't want to say that Marcus Major is somebody that, if I'm Oklahoma, I lean on for long term, just because he really hasn't found his footing to break the big one yet, right? Like, that screen pass was great. That was great. And the run was amazing. But I'm looking at the stat line and I'm looking at, just what I watched. He's gain a yard, gain a yard, gain a yard. All right, break it for 10, gain a yard, gain a yard, gain a yard, break it for 15. That's kind of what Marcus Major does, right? Like, there's no big run yet. And we haven't seen it. We have not seen a big run from Marcus Major yet. We saw it from Tawee Walker, who is by no means as fast as Marcus Major. And yet that dude, I want to know how many yards he has after contact this year.
Well,
how many yak yards does this dude have?
It's actually something I remarked on at halftime, because the Oklahoma offensive line was not getting much of a push in the first half as far as just establishing the run game and opening up those holes. And I remarked, I was sitting there with our guy Brian Clinton in the workroom, and I said, man, Oklahoma's yards before contact figure for that first half of play, which the reason I brought up is because Oklahoma was top 5 nationally last year in yards before contact. The offensive line, at least as far as run blocking was concerned, was excellent in 2022. I said, man, I wonder if Oklahoma's yards per contact is even positive right now. But for a guy like Tawee Walker, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how many yards you give him before contact, because the first guy's never going to bring him down. He's a fun player to have, man. He has been a bright spot.
How many yards did he carry that scrum at one point? I think it was like a 3rd and 4 or whatever, and they ran the ball with him, and he just carried the dudes after he got the first down, and then just carried him like another 4 or 5 yards. You know, remember that?
Oh yeah,
Like
trust
the
me, I
crowd
remember
stood
that.
up and was like, "Yes, that was awesome."
That's the type of power that Oklahoma hasn't had in the backfield since Samaje Perine.
All right, what do we take away, Jesse, from Dylan Gabriel's game today?
It's tough because his final line isn't bad by any means. 176 yards passing, 19 to 27 completions for 4 touchdowns, no turnovers. It's not bad on paper, and that's in that fourth quarter. He was big, especially that drive after SMU cut it to 14-11 in the fourth quarter. And, Dylan Gabriel led a drive to immediately respond, to score. But it's tough because Dylan Gabriel had 88 yards passing heading into the fourth quarter. 88.
Yeah, that's
And it's bad, and he didn't look comfortable. The wide receivers weren't getting a ton of separation when they did. Dylan Gabriel wasn't always finding them. I think it's good that he did find that rhythm eventually, but I also thought the play calling today was pretty odd, and there were situations where it just didn't look like Dylan Gabriel was in a like Dylan Gabriel has weaknesses as a quarterback. We all know that. Um, so I think he's a very unique, specific quarterback that you really need to tailor things around. I thought there were moments today that there weren't good play calls, like he was done a disservice by some of the play calls. But at the same time, there were throws he should have made that he missed. There were reads that he should have made that he missed. And 4 touchdowns is great. 70% completion percentage is great. But heading into that fourth quarter, the passing offense simply had, 88 yards through 3 quarters against an SMU team that I certainly have respect for, who that is good, but 88 passing yards in a really close game through 3 quarters isn't going to cut it.
no. It was hard to watch. We were talking about it in the press room or the press box, and it just seemed like Oklahoma was just content to just run a couple plays and get off the field. There was no rhythm, and DG could not get any rhythm going in the pass game until third, fourth quarter. He started to get things going a little bit, and particularly the last couple drives of the fourth quarter, he got the ball rolling and started making completions. I think there were a few drops, right? I think we can acknowledge that. LV Bunkley Shelton had a first down drop early in the game when he set on his route instead of continuing it. Do you remember that one, Parker, where he literally he ran like a 15-yard in and he just set and he was bracketed if he and DG threw him open, but DG wanted him to keep running his route a little bit further in. And then the Gavin Freeman, that drop was big because I think that was that on a second and long or third and long? I can't remember. DG ran around, found Gavin Freeman
It
going
was
across
second and long, I believe.
second and long, going across. And if Gavin catches that ball, and that's probably why he dropped it, because you could see he just saw end zone. Because he catches that ball, he turns upfield, he is gone, and just dropped it. And so it was a really, really odd day for the offense. And then when you compound the off-field incident on top of it, it magnifies everything. If that makes sense. Like it magnified everything. So, anyways, yeah, Oklahoma won 28-11. I think we'll have more on this as the week rolls along. We'll have more on the Levy situation. Again, all three of us will sit here and tell you it's awkward. It was weird. And It's unfortunate that this thing took place. I think that's the best I can say, man. Like, situation sucks. The awareness of everybody involved, that sucks, and it's caused an uproar. And we're gonna know more from it because Josie's commented on it, which means Brent Venable is gonna comment more on it, which means the media and everybody's gonna expect, and the fans are gonna expect Coach Levy to comment more on it as well until this thing dies down. But luckily, Oklahoma's playing Tulsa next week, so this, if you're gonna have crap like this, I would have it on when you play Tulsa. All right. That's going to do it for this version of the OU Insider Under the Visor Sooners postgame podcast, guys. It is almost 2 a.m. So please, please, please be kind to us. We're trying to get this stuff out to you guys as much best as possible and as much content as possible. But Parker and I, and then Jesse and Parker, will all have more podcast stuff coming and thoughts and takeaways. But if you're not, we are going to have, starting tomorrow, a promo on OU Insider for OU Insider. We're going to run it this week, and it is going to be, you guys get 30 days free of OU Insider if you sign up between Sunday and Friday of this week, or Sunday and Saturday, Sunday and Sunday. We'll end it next Sunday night. So if you sign up between the next 7-8 days, you get OU Insider for 30 days from the time you sign up. So that means you're going to get all the OU Texas, Cincinnati, Iowa State, and whoever else they play after that. I don't know. I can't think that far ahead. But anyways, you're going to get all that. There's going to be more commitments. There's going to be more recruiting. Parker and I will be out and about. We will be on the road. We'll be covering this thing head to toe for you. Jesse will be covering the team as well. We'll have all this stuff for you on OUinsider.com VIP. All right. If you're not subscribed to this YouTube, subscribe. Hit the like, thumbs up, whatever. Give us 5 stars on whatever platform you listen to this podcast. We want to thank you guys again. Oklahoma won 28-11 after a slow start. Defense played great. Offense, ho-hum. There it is. There's your podcast. There's your post-game notes. We'll have more for you guys this week. Thank you guys so much. For Parker Thune, for Jesse Crittenden, my name is Brandon Drum. You guys have a blessed day.